Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Exergy Energy and How to Be Green, Resilient, and Save Money, a do-it-yourself guide. This is I believe it's our sixth in our series of teaching you how to do what we do, basically be green, be resilient, and save money. So before we get started, we just have a couple of housekeeping chores that we got to go through. This is being recorded, so we have put everybody on mute. Sorry about that, but that's the case. We love questions, so if you have a question, please use the chat box. We have somebody monitoring that. And ask questions at any time. We won't necessarily wait until the end to answer your questions. But use the chat box, not the Q&A box. We don't monitor that, we monitor the chat box. So appreciate that. So let's get started. We only got 30 minutes here. And so to start out, I want to do a quick shout out to our sponsors. I want to thank Cummins for sponsoring this webinar series. Cummins is a world leader in high quality, what I'll call prime mover power generation sets. Pencat Corporation, longtime partner with Exergy. If you need quality power, you need resilient power, there's nobody better than Pencat. I mean, when I say quality power, you have, complex, very, sensitive manufacturing processes, and you can't take any, noise and things on the lines. Boy, talk to Pencat. Hitachi, inspiring the next, great capital partners of ours, and really appreciate their support. RPG Energy Group has been a longtime supporter and partner to Exergy. We've done a couple of projects together. And Energy Storage Development Partners. This is led up by Chet Lyons, probably the best battery guy in the country. So let's get started. All right. So what do we do? So Exergy is a simple and easy to use platform. Let me use what I mean by platform here. Think of Amazon. You go into Amazon to buy something, that's what Exergy is. You go onto Exergy, and we provide a one-stop shop for municipalities and businesses that want to be green, resilient, and save money. And we will make them, for you, 100% green. Every electron you consume will be from renewable sources. We'll make you 100% resilient. If the grid goes down, you keep on running, and we'll typically save you 10 to 15% on what you're currently spending. And that includes the backup generator as well. But this webinar series is about you. It's about people, organizations want to do it themselves, a DIY here. And the seminar series, we've gone through a whole variety of things. What's the best backup generator, batteries versus backup, behind the meter solar. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about what does an energy bill look like? What should it look like? And what can you actually affect by implementing the Exergy strategy? So we're going to take this, as we've done in every one of these seminars, in three parts. So part number one is, what are the costs? Part number two, what's the anatomy of an electric bill? And then number three, how do we actually save money by implementing the Exergy model? Just to get us in the mood, and I've used this quote before, only about 6% of electricity customers now pay through rates that give them a role in the types of energy they use when they use it. The rest use a rate that discourages customer interest, encourages no change in the power mix, and gives utilities no motive to evolve. I think they're being way too kind here. If you look at your energy bill, to me, it is like the poster child of being complex, hard to understand, and you basically, in reading it, find you have almost no idea how to manage your energy costs, and the type of energy that you use. What you really want is an invoice like this. So if you were an Exergy customer, you get an invoice that has one line on it, which is, how much energy did you consume? What was the price that we charged for that? And this is what you owe us. That is what an Exergy invoice looks like. This is what you get, or what you're getting today. Now, you're going to notice some redactions here. These are a true customer bill. And we had to obscure some things, so we didn't want to identify who that may be. But you'll notice it's a whole lot more than a single line. And it's broken into two parts. Part on the left is energy, part on the right is charges added to your energy. I think that the utilities have pretty much gotten the same game plan as the cell phone guys in being able to complicate your bills. We're going to go through this in a little bit more detail and how the Exergy model and strategy adjust those. But to understand how to save, and to save, you got to understand what the costs are, how they're associated, and things like that. And costs are dominated by four factors. And in many ways, there are almost four different domains or suppliers. The first one is energy. What does it really cost to produce the electrons? So you've got some power plant somewhere, let's say it's a natural gas combined cycle plant, they have a cost to produce that electron. That's the cost of the energy. But then you have the cost of the infrastructure. That's the wires, the poles, the transformers, all of that stuff necessary to get those electrons from the generator to you. Somebody's got to pay for that sort of stuff. So that is a huge cost. Utilization is a really fascinating part of this. Utilization is how much of that infrastructure are you actually using at any one point in time. So for example, during the hottest day of the summer, it's hot September day, sun's blazing, humidity's high, no air, it's hot. The grid is at its highest load. Everybody's got their air conditioners on and everything else. Let's call that utilization 100%. Now we're in the wintertime, it's the middle of the day, it's a mild day, people's heaters aren't on, et cetera, et cetera. That grid infrastructure usage may only be 20%. On average, the grid's assets are only used, or its utilization is only about 50%. So we are paying for all those wires, poles, transformers, generators, and all of that. We have to pay for that extra capacity that is only used a few times, or say maybe a few hundred hours a year. And the last one is volatility and risk. Energy prices, or that generator's electron price, isn't constant. It changes literally every 5 minutes. And some of the grids now are thinking of going to 1-minute pricing. Energy prices bounce around a lot, and that's because there's no storage, there's no inventory in the grid. So if the grid load falls and I got excess generation, the price is going to go down because I got to do something with it. If all of a sudden the load goes up and I got to fire up some generator that's been sitting there and I got to warm them up and everything else, the price is going to go up. So the energy price jumps around an awful lot. The reason we're having this conversation, and I took a simple bill here, I just want to highlight something. In this bill, the demand charge, that's all the other stuff, not the actual electricity that I'm consuming, but the amount that's allocated to me based upon how much of the grid's load I'm taking during that super hot September day with the high humidity. The demand charge on this bill is 60% of the bill. The energy is less than 40% of the bill. So let's go back to the anatomy of our bill. And in this particular case, if you look on the left-hand side, we've got about a $17,500 charge. That's the energy. Those are the actual electrons that are being delivered to you. The $12,478 on the other side are all the other charges that are riding along with it. And that's, again, that's the wires, the transformers, the substations, all of that has to get billed to you somehow. And they bill these things to you in a variety of ways. And we're going to go through these in a little bit of detail. So you have what are called usage-based charges. So this is the amount that's allocated to you in real time based upon how many kilowatt hours you're actually consuming. So the typically the local distribution companies and things like that, and a lot of riders. You know, the state has all kinds of things that they want you to pay for as well. Maybe they're renewable energy things. There could be some special programs. Gets charged to you in these kilowatt hour based charges. Now, why this is important is if you're following the Exergy model, and we're going to have a backup generator that we're going to use to reduce our exposure to a lot of things, the amount that we reduce our grid consumption reduces these added charges because they ride along. If I'm generating from behind the meter, these charges do not apply. The next one are the demand charges. Now we broke that into two, whether they're the local demand charges or they're the transmission demand charges. So your local utility is going to charge you based upon, now on this bill, it's 30 minutes. In many bills, it's 15. It's how much load you have during any 15 or 30-minute increment within a month, regardless of what the grid is doing. So if 2 o'clock in the morning, you're consuming 100 kilowatts and the rest of the 24 hours, you're doing 60 kilowatts, your demand charge for that month will be 100, even though you've only used it for a single hour for that month. Some states or some utilities have an even nastier game, which is called the ratchet. And that is the highest 15 to 30 minute time determines what you're paying going forward in the future for at least for a year, unless you have a higher demand. So let's take our example where it was 1 o'clock in the morning, it was 100 kilowatts, your average is 60. That 100 kilowatts is going to be used to charge you for the next 12 months, unless you do something higher than 100. It doesn't matter if you do anything lower. If every hour from that time on is lower than 100, you get nothing. You're going to pay that 100 for a year. If you went up to 120, it then resets. The ratchet resets, and now you're going to pay 120 for a year unless it goes up, or you got to wait a year. We had a really, really interesting situation where somebody was paying an extra $250,000 a year in demand charges. And nobody could figure out where it was coming from because we look at the average demand, it wasn't that high and all that kind of stuff. And what we found was that on the third Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, the control system was set to turn on all of the emergency equipment. That's emergency pumps, emergency, all kinds of things, emergency evacuation, air handlers, all kinds of things. And there was this huge spike in the demand for about 5 to 6 minutes. But that was enough because of this ratcheting mechanism. That was enough to cost them $250,000 a year. And the last one is the transmission demand charges. Now, in this particular bill, it's actually incorporated in what's called the generation service charge, but in most bills, it's broken out separately. And lastly, but not least, of course, are taxes. They are going to tax you for this stuff. And again, if you can reduce your bill, you reduce your taxes. So you got to take all of this into consideration. Now, here are the 4 things you need to know about bills, pricings, cost, if you're going to save money and you're going to follow the Exergy strategy. Number 1 you need to understand is index pricing. Number 2, peak load contribution. We just saw that. Number 3, peak shaving. And number 4, demand response. So what is index pricing? Now, you as an average sort of commercial, industrial, municipal customer have what's called a standard tariff, and you pay a certain amount per kilowatt hour. This is the electrons now. You pay a certain amount per kilowatt hour for that, basically regardless of what the wholesale market is doing. So the wholesale market might be bouncing between literally -5 cents $2.20, right? But you're going to pay an average, you're going to pay 6, all right? So that all of that volatility you are shielded from, but you're going to pay a much higher rate in order to compensate essentially the utility for taking on that price volatility risk. So if you were to simply drop from the standard tariff to what's called an index product, basically you're going to go on the wholesale market, you would save an average in the United States about 20% in your energy cost. Now, this is just the energy side. This is just the electrons. But by going on the index, by buying wholesale, that means you're exposed to all the price swings. So when I said it could be as much as -5 cents, boy, that'd be a great day. But it could also get as high as $9,000 a megawatt hour. That's in ERCOT in Texas. And it's hit that multiple times. Can you imagine paying $9,000 per megawatt hour, or that's $9 per kilowatt hour? So you want to be able to protect yourself if you're going to go on the index. But by going on the index, your average price will fall. But to protect yourself, you need to use your backup generator in order to not be buying from the grid when the prices are sky high. This is the for the major ISOs in the country. Just look at that price volatility. Down there on the lower left is ERCOT, that's Texas. Notice the volatility of that market. By going on the index, you will get a much lower average price, but you've got to protect yourself. That's where you use your backup generator in order to essentially not buy from the grid when the grid prices are high. Now, peak load contribution to me is probably one of the weirdest things out there. And this is, how do we allocate the costs of the transmission infrastructure? That's the wires, the substations, the transformers, everything from that utility that's generating the electrons to the substation, let's say in your town. How do you pay for that? So the way the grid does that is what's called peak load contribution, or what is your contribution to the peak load? How much of that infrastructure as a percentage are you using at certain times? So it's essentially based upon how much load you have on the grid during a small number of peak hours. And when I say a small number of peak hours, I mean very small. So here are the top 6 ISOs out there. For PJM, which is Mid-Atlantic, Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland, how much you pay in your transmission demand charges and capacity charges is based upon how much load you had on the grid during 5 distinct hours during the year. ERCOT, it's 4, New England and stuff, it's 1 hour. So your entire next year's demand charges are based upon how much load you had on the grid for possibly only 1 hour. Now, what's phenomenal about this is nobody tells you what that hour is, or those 5 hours, and it's done ex post facto. So it's a look back. So the amount that you're paying this year is based upon the load you had on the grid during a single hour last year, and that hour is determined by when the grid load was the highest. It's not some predetermined thing like it's 2 o'clock on August 27th. It could be any day, any month, any hour when the grid is under its most stress. And that will determine how much of your demand charge you're going to pay, and that's for an entire year. Now, as I said, the peak load contribution comes down from the transmission side. So this is, the big lines, the big towers, that type of thing. Once it gets to your town and your local substation, now the energy is delivered to your location by the local distribution company. It's a utility, but the local distribution company. They've got poles and transformers and wires and meters and all those things that need to also be allocated. How do they do it? In general, they do that on this 15 to 30 minutes per month thing that we just discussed a little while ago. So how much of you're paying depends upon the highest load you had during some 15-minute period during the month. So let's take a look, and this is where peak shaving comes into the fore. Let's assume this is your load. I got the green and the blue. I have a couple of hours. Let's say this happens only once a week, right? So sometime on a Thursday, I have certain processes I run on a Thursday that increase my peak load. So what I'm going to pay for every hour for that month is going to be determined currently by what is happening on that 8th hour at 22 kilowatts, right? That will determine my demand and my demand charges. So if I'm able to flatten this thing out by using battery, by using my backup generator or something, I can reduce those demand charges. Now you'll see that other than this one process that runs once, one day a week for a few hours, if I take that out, the rest of it's pretty flat. So there's not much I can do because I'm not going to run my backup generator 24 hours a day, right? So peak shaving, we can reduce those demand charges, but it really, really, really depends on what your load shape looks like. And lastly, demand response. And demand response is the thing I love the most because it is something that is the most mutually beneficial thing between customers and the grid. And what it basically boils down to is federal regulations consider the reduction of load to be the same thing as an increase in generation. So the grid is incentivized to pay you the same wholesale rate to go away than it is to leave your load on the grid. And the logic behind this is very, very simple, is the more load on the grid, the more stress on the grid. The more stress on the grid, the more likely we're going to have an outage or a problem. Let's go back to our super hot, humid September day. Everybody's got their air conditioner turned on. It's hot anyway and everything else. But what happens is as the temperature goes up, the wires, literally the transmission lines, the distribution lines stretch. As they get hot, they stretch. Then the more the people turn on the air conditionings and things, and the more we got, more current going through those wires, they stretch more and more and more. They start sagging, and eventually they touch something, typically trees or something like that, and boom, you've got an outage. So from the grid's perspective, the grid's primary goal is reliability, and then second, at its lowest cost, they would prefer you to take your load off the grid and reduce that stress. So they will pay you to do that, which is absolutely fantastic because what do you have? You've got a backup generator, maybe a battery, and remember these, we got these price swings. So when the grid is under its most stress is when the grid price is the highest, right? Because they're bringing in all the other marginal generators to supply the power. So again, let's take a look at ERCOT. So what we do is during those times of high grid stress, we demand respond. We go to the grid and we say, look, we're willing to take our load off the grid if you pay us the current wholesale price. Well, that wholesale price could be extraordinarily high. Let's go back to, to ERCOT. That could be $9 a kilowatt hour, $9,000 a megawatt hour. It might probably only cost us 5.5, 6 cents max for us to self-generate. Well, I'll self-generate at 6 cents all day long. Somebody's going to pay me $9 a kilowatt hour. So demand response can do a tremendous amount for not only reducing your costs, protecting you from those price swings, but be a great profit generator as well. So let's go back to our bill here, this ugly thing, and let's look at where our actions may have an impact. So the first one is, if we're generating ourselves, okay, whether that's demand response, whatever, as we reduce the amount we buy from the grid, we reduce all of those charges that get added on to those kilowatt hours. So all of those riders, those other things that the state wants to finance are riding along with our energy, but only if it comes from the grid. If it comes from our behind the meter gas generator, then we're not charged those. So you have to take this into account when you're looking at the comparison between your self-generation cost and actually buying from the grid. If you got less purchases from the grid, and that includes demand response and everything else, your taxes will go down, right? Because you're not buying as much, you don't get taxed as much. It's the same as any sales tax. So you got to take that into account as well. And then when you get into your demand response, you can certainly reduce your peak load contribution through demand response, because that happens only on the specific hours. And just to let you know, from a Exergy perspective, we have artificial intelligence machine learning that watches the grid at your node continuously and is able to forecast when those peak load contribution hours are likely to occur and start up your generator and reduce your load automatically. You don't have to worry about it. If you're going to do it yourself, which is what this webinar is all about, you can subscribe to forecasting services and they'll send you an email or a text alert and say, uh-oh, we think this afternoon is going to be the peak load contribution day, better turn on your generator. So it's a way of doing it. With respect to whether demand response is going to help you on your peak shaving or on your local distribution demand charges, really depends on what your load profile looks like. We took a look at that just a little while ago. If it's completely flat, you're stuck. Nothing you can do about it. You're going to get charged what you're getting charged. If, however, it's got some spikiness to it, especially if you've got certain processes and things that do not run frequently, but add a lot to that demand, then by doing demand response during those periods of time, or just turning on your generator, is going to help to reduce your bill substantially. So why is this important, and what's the outlook look like right now? So I took this from the Energy Information Administration. Energy prices are forecasted to fall 10% over the period, and the period is the next 5 years, in response to continued low-cost natural gas and declining cost of renewables. Isn't that great? Your prices will go down. However, your bill's going to go up. Here's the reason, right? Remember when we looked at that one bill, 60% of the bill was demand charges. In the other bill, it was roughly $30,000. $17,000 was actual energy, and the other were the ancillary charges. So those energy charges are going to go down 10%, but they're only half of the bill. So 10%, half of that is 5%, but then you've got half of the bill going to go up maybe 20 to 25%. So overall, your bill is going to go up with more and more costs being associated to things that you can do something about. Your PLC, your demand charges, and things like that. So if you want to save money, you want to do the Exergy model, here's what you got to do. Number one, you got to reduce your demand charges by using your backup generator to shave your PLC, and if possible, depending upon what your load profile looks like, to do your peak shaving to reduce those local distribution demand charges. Number two, you got to change your tariff to a wholesale and use your backup generator then to protect you from the price swings. By going from a standard tariff to a wholesale index product, you'll cut your energy charge by 20%. Now that's just the energy charge. Now remember, all of the other taxes and things like that that get added on to that energy charge will also go down because the energy charge went down. But by going on the index, you expose yourself to the wholesale market price swings. That's when you need to use your backup generator in order to protect yourself. The reality here is it's a very simple strategy. It's buy low and sell high, meaning when the grid price is low, you buy from the grid. When the grid price is high, you demand respond and essentially sell back to the grid. That protects you from the price swings and generates a substantial amount of profit for you because you're using, and this is what's important, you're using your load the way the grid wants you to. The grid wants you to demand respond. That's why they incentivize you by paying. Take advantage of those aspects. All right, reality. Is it complicated? Yes and no. I mean, it's fairly easy to understand the bill. It's pretty easy to understand where the charges are coming from, but managing them is not as simple as you've got to be watching the grid. Is this a PLC hour? Is this not a PLC hour? Where are prices going? Turn on your generator. Most companies and organizations are not energy companies. And doing it themselves, that's what this webinar is all about, you can certainly do that. But it might make more sense for you to just come to somebody like Exergy to do it, because it will honestly save you more money because we've got it all done, automated, and all linked in. So if it's complicated, yeah, come to us, and you'd rather have this bill than the other one, and we'll provide that for you with all of the benefits. Again, we'll make you 100% green, we'll make you 100% resilient, and we'll save you typically 10 to 15% on your energy spend. Well, I think we've come to the end of my half hour. I want to thank you so much. Dave, do we got any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we've got one here related to going out and doing procurement. The person asks, my organization has been contacted by one of the brokers that can go out and get wholesale energy for us. Is that another way to approach this problem, or are we going to still be having the same PLC problem?
Okay, that's a great question. And I guess I have to throw in a little cautionary word here is energy brokers are fantastic. But remember from your bill that the energy is separate from all these other charges. So if you go to an energy broker, he or she will find you lower cost wholesale energy. However, that will not do anything for the demand charges of either the PLC or the local distribution demand charges or other adders. So it's one of those things, you got to be very careful and listen. So if somebody says, hey, you're currently paying, and I'm making numbers up here, you're currently paying six cents a kilowatt hour, I'll get it for you for 5 cents or 4 cents. That sounds like a really substantial savings. However, if the 6 cents only is 40% of your bill, the amount that you're saving isn't that much because you're not going to touch the other charges except for taxes, the amount of the taxes. So it is a good thing to do if you want to save some money. It is not the thing to do if you want to be green, resilient, and save a lot more money.
We have one more question here. I'm going to paraphrase. How have the California wildfires, such as the Paradise Fire, impacted utilities' viewpoints and operating procedures for grid constraints, aside from obviously increased blackouts and brownouts?
Wow. I think I'm going to make you answer that one. You live out in Berkeley, California. I'm in Washington. Yeah. Here. So first, it's a fantastic example of just the issue we were talking about demand response and grid stress and grid load. How did those fires start? They started by drooping lines, hitting trees, setting them on fire. That's the reality of what literally happened. So all utilities have taken this to heart and are being much more aggressive with regard to managing that grid stress during high temperature times. So what do we see in PG&E is, they look at it and they go, gee, it's going to be hot, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. We're going to have to limit the amount of load that we can have on our lines, because if we allow the load to go all the way up, they're going to droop, they're going to start another fire. So they're going to shut you down. And we've seen this in PG&E where literally towns could be shut down for a week or something like that. You don't have any power. So it's very substantial there. And we're seeing it all over. That's one of the reasons that PG&E is financing and building lots and lots of, I'm going to call it distributed generation, primarily at substations. So if it gets super hot and things, rather than using the distribution lines to get all of the energy out there, they'll fire up generators that are more local to the load in order to reduce some of that stress. But other utilities in the U.S. are doing similar things as PG&E. Now, I'm not sure that answered the question. Dave, help me out here.
No, I think that's about right. In terms of other operating procedures for grid constraints, I think the primary focus for the utilities is maintenance of their equipment and also protection of the customers' needs. And we're seeing here a confluence of the two values are in conflict with each other. So being able to put your own power supply behind your meter in the form of a generator or battery is only going to help the utility protect their own equipment. So it seems to be a good solution.
Yeah, it is. It very much is. If there's no other questions, I want to thank everybody for attending. I think this is, Dave, I think this is the 6th of our series. So if you're interested, the early ones, we did things like the overview of how the Exergy system works, backup versus battery, how to get a free backup generator, how to get a free battery. So a variety of things you might find interesting. We have one next week, which we're changing, and this is very controversial. We're going to say why energy efficiency is a bad idea. We don't really mean it in that context, but we want to take a look at energy efficiency from the perspective of investment in the world as the world transitions to a carbon-free energy future. Thank you again. Really appreciate you for joining us. If there are any questions, or more importantly, if there are webinars or subjects you would like us to address, we're happy to do that. Go to our website, leave us a comment, or you can reach me on LinkedIn or something and say, hey, we'd really like to hear a webinar on X, Y, and Z. We'd be happy to do it. Thank you so much, and you have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks. This webinar will disconnect now.